So at the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal Barca, which I'm going to represent with an H here, had to take a gamble versus a much larger Roman force in order to ensure a tactical victory, okay? So at the time, this is how most armies laid out their men. You have Hannibal's men here in the middle, and on the flanking positions you have the cavalry, right? Now I'm going to obviously go in more detail about the layout because it wasn't so standard, as I'll later explain, but this is a very basic layout of the way battles went at the time, the standard formations, right? You had the Romans on the other side with their infantry and their cavalry, right? So Hannibal's gamble is very simple. He said this. He said, "Look, I bet you anything that my cavalry can defeat the Roman cavalry before the Roman center pushes through the middle, buckles my center, and breaks my line," right? So his win condition, right? He has a win condition. His win condition here is time. Hannibal needs time. The more time he can make, the more time his cavalry has to defeat the Roman cavalry and create a double envelopment. So this is a very basic layout. So I'm going to go into more detail now about how each side laid out their men and how the battle proceeded. So the first thing I want to talk about is the number of men that each side had. So on the Roman side, you had about 80,000 infantry, right? And we're going to represent the infantry today with this little pawn. See? Right here. So Roman infantry. So you have to remember that at the time, the Roman infantry isn't the mighty fighting force that it would later become. This was before the Marius reforms, right? So you have the Marius reforms. This would come later. This was before the Marius reforms. At the time, soldiers weren't professional soldiers. You brought your own equipment, your own swords, your own shields, etc. And once you were done fighting, you'd go back to your whatever job, whatever profession it was you did outside of wartime. So that's an important point to keep in mind. So we have here our Roman soldiers, right, which were about 80,000. And we also had about 6,400 cavalry, right? And in this video, our cavalry is going to be represented by this right here. If you can see it. This is cavalry. This is Roman cavalry right here. So that's on the Roman side. On the other side, on Hannibal's side, which we said we're going to denote with an H, Hannibal only had about 40,000 men. So you can see straight away that he was at a disadvantage immediately. Hannibal's men were going to be represented with this pawn. See that? Right here. This is Hannibal's men. But this is where Hannibal's advantage lay. Hannibal's advantage lay in his 10 to 12,000 cavalry. And not just any cavalry, mind you. Gallic, Hispanic, and Numidian cavalry. Numidian cavalry, it was light cavalry, but they were superior. They were very good riders, very good fighters. And it was his cavalry that Hannibal was going to rely upon to win the battle. So these are the two forces that faced each other, right? So let's talk about the layout. So these are the forces. Let's talk about the layout. We're going to talk about the Roman layout first, or the way they laid out their infantry, which is in a sort of maniple system, right? Which is where they line up in these long lines, shoulder to shoulder, tightly packed, like so. Like this. All of them in the center. And I guess you could imagine there would have been another line maybe like this. So that's the Roman formation for their men. Oh, I also forgot, you have the two Roman commanders at the time, the two Roman leaders, Paulus and Varro. They're way at the back over here, overlooking the battle, right? And you have the Roman infantry. The Roman cavalry on the side. For Hannibal does something very different. So I'm going to start off with Hannibal's cavalry. Here, the elite equestrian force, the Numidian cavalry on the one side, and the Hispanic and the Gallic cavalry on the other side, right? Now, Hannibal is represented here by, I think this is Ra, sun god Ra, right here. Oh, let me know in the comments where you would place Hannibal in your top 10 generals, where you'd rank him. Because for me, he's definitely in the top 10. Where exactly, I don't know, but just let me know in the comments where you'd rank Hannibal. Even if he does even make your top 10 list, I don't know, maybe he's not even in your top 10, which we need to have a talk about. But anyway, our great leader here, Hannibal. And Hannibal, right? He has his Hispanic and Gallic infantry, but he also has something else. He has his African infantry on the flanks. So what he does is he lines up his men like such. See this? Here we have Hannibal in the middle, right? And we have his men. Hannibal lines up his men like this, and he begins advancing slowly. This is before the battle starts. He begins advancing slowly with his men, but he does so in such a way such that the flanks move slower than the center. So he advances quickly, and so does the center. And as they're all moving up, he tells them to fall behind. So they move fast like this, and these guys fall behind, these guys fall behind, these guys fall behind. So what you end up with is a sort of crescent formation. He creates a crescent shape like this. His African infantry on the side, and Hannibal in the middle with his men, with the center. And you end up creating a sort of crescent formation like this. Now, this is genius for many reasons. The first important reason is that Hannibal knows that in order for him to win the battle, he has to hold, his men need to hold. And the most important place for them to hold is in the center. Now, by placing himself directly in the middle with his men, he boosts their morale at an incredible, or rather in an incredible manner. Because you have to imagine, right, if you're like a Hispanic or a Gallic infantryman, and at the day of the battle you're standing at the frontier, and you look ahead of you and you see this 2-to-1, much larger Roman army, you might panic a little, right? If you're right at the front here with your men ready. Having Hannibal at the front here, you turn to your right, you see him. You've got to have like a boost of morale, some faith. Your leader's right there with you. Clearly, this is all going according to plan. This is point number one. Great morale booster. Point number two, it allows him to create the controlled retreat that he's set up for, right? So remember we said he's buying time, and the whole plan is that by creating this shape, he's buying time as the Roman infantry pushes his men backwards. By being in the center, he can help create the slow, controlled retreat, right? He doesn't want his men to panic, he doesn't want his men to break. Slow and controlled. So by being at the front and center, he can, as he retreats, as the Romans advance, he can control that retreat. And the third thing is that the crescent shape allows him to buy a lot more time, because if they were all in a straight line, it'd be a lot easier for the Romans to shove through and break, right? But by creating this crescent formation, he's buying a lot of time, right? As the line goes back and then goes this way and breaks, he's playing to his win condition very intelligently. Now, this is our standard formation, right? This is how the battle is laid out before. And the way it's going to proceed is as such. The battle begins, and the infantry, the elite equestrian infantry, as we said, is going to attack the flanks, as said. And the Roman infantry begins their advance, right? They begin moving forward as such. Now, the way the battle plays out is that Hannibal actually does manage to get enough time. So the two infantry advance and they're fighting, right? The Roman infantry begin pushing forward, as we said, and the lines begin to buckle. They begin to retreat, and they begin to go backwards, right? The Romans begin forcing them forward, perhaps more so in the center, because remember, it was an eclipse, right? So the center is shoving more, the Roman center. The reserves are pushing through, but not at the same rate, mind you. And what you end up with at one point of the battle is they've shoved such that you have like a sort of, not a reverse crescent, but almost a reverse crescent, right? The Roman lines have pushed in. Remember, they're all shoulder to shoulder, tightly packed as such. Okay? And at this point of the battle, right? This is the deciding point. At this point, if Hannibal's cavalry has not defeated the Roman cavalry, then the Roman lines can push through, break Hannibal's lines, and win the day. But that's not what happens. What happens is, before the Roman center could break the Hannibal center, the cavalry actually does drive off and defeat the Roman cavalry. And this is like the Hannibal asking for the check at the end of the battle. This is game over at this point. At the situation we're in, this is it. The battle's done. What happens is Hannibal then tells his African infantry to move up to begin the flank as his cavalry comes from behind, right? So look what happens. Look at this. Look at this. I remember before we talked about how the Romans, right, would line up in these maniples, these shoulder to shoulder tight lines. And it's great for pushing the center. It's great for the tactics of the time. It's very standard. It's what the Romans excelled at. But you're incredibly unflexible, right? Because you're also tightly packed and all centered like this. If, for example, if your enemy's to the right, or if you need to turn or rotate, you can't do anything, right? These guys are useless. They can't fight. They're just stuck in the middle, surrounded, as Hannibal's men close in. And I want to talk briefly about what it must have been like to be a Roman infantry, like at the beginning of the day. You must have been confident, because Rome had never fielded that many men in one battle. You must have had this great sense of excitement, I guess. But as the day progresses, and you're surrounded at this point, right? The battle's over. You've got to imagine 80,000 men trapped like this. And say you're one of the one in the middle. You know, a concert gone wrong. And you can hear everyone around you dying. You're just waiting. The sun's out there. I don't know. I can't imagine what it's like to be there, just standing there for hours, unable to do anything. It's like waiting in line for your death. Terrifying stuff if you're Roman, but I mean, great stuff for our boy Hannibal. Battle of Cannae is one of my favorite. Hopefully next video I want to do one on the Battle of Trafalgar. Admiral Nelson is also outnumbered, also takes a gamble, and also uses a tactic that goes against the standard tactic of the time, right? He does something different, something unique. And Hannibal's defeat here is he handed Rome one of its greatest defeats. I'm not going to talk too much about the results of this or why this battle took place, or the Punic Wars. I just want to give a brief outline on the tactics and how the battle played out. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Hope to do another one soon. And yeah, see you next time.